Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, currently engaging in hand-to-hand combat with Satan himself, here to talk to you today about Mars in opposition to Pluto. Oppositions can often be tense, difficult and very fractious aspects. They occur when two planets are separated from each other by 180 degrees with 10 degrees of orb of influence on either side. So they are literally on opposite sides of the heavens on different hemispheres. If one was at the full noon position, the other one would be on the other side of the world. And I think understanding that only one of the planets in an opposition is visible at any given time can teach us a little something about the symbology of how these aspects tend to manifest themselves. If one planet is visible while the other one is dark and hidden below the Earth, it can often suggest that we are experiencing a duality within and without ourselves, that we are more likely to identify with one side of the opposition, to identify with one planet, and then to project the other out there as something that doesn't belong to us or represent who we are. Sometimes this is not always literally true. Sometimes we can see how both planets are representing different parts of ourselves that are in friction or competition with one another. But even when that occurs and we have the psychological spaciousness to comprehend these dualities existing in opposition within us, we are still usually more inclined to identify with one side than the other, to see one as an aspect of ourselves, an approach to life that we want to prioritize, and to see the other side as something negative that we would prefer to remove, separate, or distance ourselves from. Oppositions often are aspects of separation. However, I don't feel like there's always a hard and fast rule for how we can assess oppositions, because it really depends on the planets involved. If you have an opposition between two planets that are actually quite empathetic and sympathetic to each other and have similar roles and aims and wants in life, they might cooperate quite well. And in that case, it becomes less of an issue of two planets trying to pull away from each other, like two dogs who are connected by the same lead, pulling in a different direction in a tug of war, and can be more a case of two planets learning to cooperate. There is often a tendency sometimes with oppositions to want to yo-yo between extremes. If I go back to that example of one planet being visible at once while the other is in darkness, if you think about during the course of a day, both of those planets are going to spend an equal amount of time being in the heavens and then being below the Earth. So you might find that during part of the opposition, you swing between expressing only one planet and doing so with a zealous vigour that denies the existence of the other, only to abruptly switch and start expressing the qualities and characteristics of the other planet. And ultimately, rather than yo-yoing between extremes, which can lead to sometimes self-destructive, inconsistent, erratic, and all over the place behaviour, where we're saying yes one minute and then no the next, the desire is to treat that opposition more like Libra's scales, to understand that both have needs within us that need to be met, and finding a way of balancing the two, of encouraging these planets not to conflict, to compete with one another, but to negotiate and cooperate instead. That is not always possible. It really depends on the planets involved. So if we imagine that this opposition means that Mars and Pluto are in conflict and competition in some way, let's take a moment just to understand the difference between our two competitors and the different sides of ourselves that they represent. Because in many ways there are some similarities between Mars and Pluto. They are considered to be different octaves of the same basic energetic note. Both of them are connected to willpower, to creativity, to destruction and sexuality, and yet how they express those very human qualities and needs is very different. It's the difference between the overt and the covert, between the abrasively apparent and the discreetly and manipulatively hidden. So Mars is the lusty warrior of our consciousness. Mars is the hunter who makes us chase after the things that we want, who makes us take action, who makes us take the initiative, who is interested in making things happen. Mars wants us to live an active, dynamic life where we are a go-getter who grabs the things that they want and doesn't just sit around on their arse. But all of us have different techniques for trying to get what we want. You know, not all of us are Mars and Aries people who have the typical martial attitude of just grabbing the thing that they want. Many of us have adopted different areas in which we identify where our strengths and superior powers lay. So, for instance, Mars in Gemini will try and get the upper hand through its superior intellect, through its ability to win an argument, through its ability to be very flexible with information so that it can always distort things to suit its own agenda. Mars in Cancer is more likely to use emotional manipulation to get what it wants, and Mars in Libra is going to use its powers of beauty, charm, apparent sociable kindness and persuasion to get what it wants. All of them are using different techniques to achieve the same end, whether that's a job or a partner or money or food or status in this world. Mars is the force that makes us reach out and grab that and says, that's mine, thank you very much. But while mythologically Mars was a loud, screaming, argy-bargy, bluff, belligerent god, pissing off everyone on the battlefield, Pluto was known for the fact that he had a helmet and veil of invisibility. He did not want to be seen. And what cannot be seen is all the more powerful for the fact that we cannot protect ourselves from something if we don't know it exists, if we don't know where it is. The very fact that it is covert, that it is hidden, that we cannot perceive it with our senses, already gives it an upper hand. You know, when Mars goes swanning about, brandishing its sword and saying, look at me, how muscular and strong I am, it's already given the game away to a large point. Everyone can see what it is. Therefore it's visible, therefore it's ready to be under attack. And Mars is okay with that, because Mars, when it feels inflated and strong, feels like it is strong enough to take on any attacks that come its way. But Pluto represents a part of us that we have hidden, usually for a very good reason. All of us will have encountered at some point in our lives an awareness that there are certain parts of ourselves which, if exposed to public view, would get us in trouble. We realize that there are desires, cravings, emotional expressions, feelings, and characteristics that for some reason are considered to be inappropriate, negative, or which are demonized by the public at large. And because of that, we don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to be imprisoned. We don't want to be punished. We don't want to be castigated. So we learn to suppress and hide and conceal that part of ourselves so that it is no longer overt, that we cannot be punished if nobody knows that we're doing something wrong. And of course, this can vary for various reasons according to the cultures we were brought up in, according to the families that we were brought up in. One thing that is considered sacred, holy, normal, or perfectly permissible in one family, culture, and group is demonized and considered the very highest of horrors in another culture. If we look at the ancient Incans and Mayans, human sacrifice for them, great, we love it, can't get enough of it. If you were really into human sacrifice in modern Britain, it's probably the kind of thing you would learn quickly not to bring up while chatting with your mates at a pub. It's something that you instead bury deep within you. Human sacrifice is an extreme example, and I do love extreme examples. They fill me with great joy. But all of us have urges and desires that we realize we need to control and restrict in some way, or find an outlet for subliming, which is healthier, easier to manage, and more socially appropriate. So all of us have had those moments where something has brought about such extreme rage in us that we feel like we could kill someone. It could be, a child screaming in the supermarket, or your dog is misbehaving, or someone around you is just pissing you off and doing something you don't want them to do. And in that moment, you realize that murder is not the socially appropriate response. So you learn to control yourself, and learning to control yourself is a big part of what Pluto is about. We need to be able to take those kind of primordial, bestial responses to things that are so powerful that they could hijack us and make us do something crazy, and find a way of actually saying, no, I can put the lid on this. Instead of that power controlling me, it can be a power that I can control instead. But there are all kinds of times when we realize that ambitions or drives we have are best kept in the dark. If you have an attraction to a married woman, someone who's married to your best friend, for instance, then you realize that acting on those feelings is going to be dangerous. You could be involved in an affair, or you could be rejected and lose a friendship. You realize that that desire is leading you into dangerous territory. But it becomes a conflict then, the conflict of knowing there's something you want, but which, according to the rules of society, you should not want. How do we navigate that? You could be in the workplace and you want to steal your boss's job. And if you come right out and say that, like a Mars person might sometimes, you're probably going to get fired. You're likely to sabotage yourself and do the opposite. You realize you have to play a longer, slower game. In fact, you want to be playing the game so well that people don't realize you're playing the game. With Pluto, any desires we have, we try and give out as little information about it as possible, whilst receiving as much information from others. So if Mars is the pugnacious knight glorifying himself on the battlefield, saying, hey, look how glorious and shining and cool my armor is, look how big and hefty and sharp my sword is, Pluto is more like a secret agent. If the enemy country that secret agent has infiltrated realizes he's a secret agent, then he's dead. So his livelihood depends on his ability to keep his true intentions, his true motives, and his true ambitions secret. So usually an area of our life where Pluto is active represents an area where we feel exposure could lead to our destruction. Therefore, keeping that secret becomes more of a life and death matter. And often that occurs most commonly in relationship dynamics that are unequal, where someone has power over us and therefore we cannot express our rage and our anger and our wants in a clear way. For instance, let's say you have a landlord who does something that really upsets you and which you think is unfair. You might want to go screaming at them and insult them and point out all the inequalities of the relationship. But there's a part of you that thinks, well, if I lose my temper with this person, they could evict me and find another tenant. Then I'd be homeless and I'd have nowhere to live. It's much better that I suppress my anger and suppress my rage and make sure it is not apparent to the other person. Likewise, if your boss or someone you work for does that, you're also going to think, I'm furious with my boss right now, but my financial livelihood depends on my working for this person. So once again, I will suppress and bury that anger. If you are in a relationship where you feel that your partner or spouse has the upper hand, again, they might do something that insults you, and yet there's that fear that if I stand up for myself, if I assert myself, if I tell them how unhappy I am with a certain problem in the relationship that doesn't seem to be going away, they might break up with me, and I really don't want that to happen. And so often there's a sense of there being a big conflict of wills an internal as well as an external power struggle when Pluto is on the scene. If we look at the relationship example, you might find the prospect of losing your partner unbearable to the point where you are willing to do anything to hold on to the relationship. You have to remember that Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio, and when Scorpio's claws cling on to something, they have no fucking desire to let it go until that thing is dead and buried. But likewise, you might also find the dynamics in the relationship that feel controlling, possessive, manipulative, or mutually destructive also unbearable. So it becomes this kind of Scylla and Charybdis situation of, do I hold on to something that's killing me, or do I risk departing from it and losing it and then find that I die in a different way? So what do you do? So when these two planets are in opposition, it creates an interesting dynamic. If Mars, by house placement, is indicating an area of our life where we feel driven, where we want to, where we feel ambitious, where we want to achieve power and strength, then Pluto in the opposite house is going to indicate an area where we might feel that we are subject to a control that is undermining us, or which is a source of fear for us in some way. And this can actually generate a lot of power. You do find that with some oppositions, the aims of both planets are kind of equal and opposite and immovable forces, that the whole of the opposition just ends up kind of being this stalemate, this standstill, where neither planet can move because it knows as soon as it does, the other one will as well. So it feels like the Hanged Man in the tarot deck. We just have to wait for circumstances to change. And that could happen for some people with this aspect, depending on their own house placements. But for me, Mars and Pluto are both such powerful and active and dynamic planets that things tend to manifest in a much more obvious way. There is more negotiation and interplay between these two planets. But I think the other reason this opposition can be so dynamic as well is that if we see Pluto as representing the embodiment of all that we fear and all that we're terrified of, often nothing motivates us more than fear. You know, very often we can be lazy, we can procrastinate, we can put off doing the things that we know we should be doing. And sometimes it's only when Pluto appears there staring at us in the face and the skull of death is staring back at us that we finally have that wake-up call that says, no, this is unendurable. I need to do something big to change, to liberate myself from this situation if I don't want to be destroyed, if I do not want this thing to consume me. So that's where the separating aspect of this opposition occurs. It can be Mars wanting to break free from all of the subconscious tendrils of Pluto that have gotten under its skin and which seems to be controlling it. It wants to sever those tendrils. It wants to sever those nerve endings and take back its self-control. An example of this could be with your health. Let's say you've been neglecting your health and your lifestyle for a while. Perhaps you've been too self-indulgent. Perhaps you've been working too hard and pushing yourself too hard. And it might not be until you get a visual marker that you are harming yourself more than you thought you were that you actually start to challenge that tide. You know, the opposition is almost like the tide suddenly changing forces. You know, it might not be until you go to a doctor and your doctor says, actually, you've got this, that, and that whole problem. You could develop high blood pressure, you could get diabetes, you could get this or that serious life compromising condition unless you change your act. And that might suddenly be a sudden wake-up call that says, okay, I'm not going to allow myself to be consumed by those compulsive, negative, self-destructive habits of Pluto. I'm instead going to take charge and seek power in an area of my life that for a while I have surrendered power. So when I was researching this aspect yesterday and looked at how this transit had played out in my own life over the past decade or more, I often found that, surprisingly, this opposition could be a moment of massive liberations where I suddenly felt strengthened and empowered enough to make big transformations in my life, which perhaps I had been neglecting or putting off for a while. There's something about Pluto bringing up everything that's buried that forces us to face the truth. When things are buried, when they are repressed, when they are pushed down, we can pretend that they are not there. If we've had problems in our relationship that make us fear for its futurity, we could just keep saying, oh, it's fine, yes, they beat me every now and then, yes, they can be abusive and controlling, yes, they might not be totally honest with money, but it's not really a problem, everything's fine. But when Pluto rolls around on the horizon, there might be that sudden wake-up call of saying, no, actually, this is not okay. This is not how things should be, and they need to change. So I'm going to give a few examples from my personal history just to show the different ways in which this can manifest. Because I know that when I'm giving fictional examples, which are often drawn from the lives of people I do astrology for, I tend to choose the most extreme, which could bring out terror in lots of you, which is not my intention. So if I show some more real life examples, which are a bit more subtle and nuanced, hopefully you will not leave this video thinking that something truly awful has to happen during the period that it is active. So in the 6 months prior to the 2019 incarnation of this transit, there was someone who I had been obsessively and madly in love with. Now, very often when we develop obsessions in romance, it's for a number of reasons, which I would like to explore. One of them is a scarcity mindset. If you feel that genuine love and attraction and a sexual response to someone are very rare things for someone to elicit in you, you're going to experience love and sex as something that is scarce, that is rare to find, that is hard to come by. So often other people just don't seem the right fit for you. They have no way of connecting with you. You don't find them attractive. They leave you feeling leave you feeling dead and numb inside. So when someone finally does come along, who makes you feel alive, who fills you with passion, who fills you with desire, who fills you with a craving, who fills you with euphoric visions of the blissful life that you could share together, which you never thought possible, it can make you lose your head because it's a rare phenomenon. And when something is rare, it is therefore more precious, because if it were to go away, we might never experience it again. So we hold on to it for bitter life. And this is what Pluto does. Pluto will hold on to something until its hands are cut off, because it thinks that if it lets it go, it will never find it again. It's a bit like a hunter who's hunting in the winter when there's been a dry season with all of the game. He's starving, he hasn't eaten in weeks, and he's never seeing any animals to kill. So when one finally comes along within his line of sight, he's going to do everything in his power to try and kill that beast, otherwise he might die of starvation. And we will do the same very often when we feel emotionally or sexually or psychologically or spiritually starved. When someone comes along who finally looks like they could nourish us and fulfill us on that deeper level, we're going to hold on, because we think if we let them go, we may starve to death because we are almost certain never to find something again. A related reason for why we may develop an obsessive passion for someone is because of self-esteem issues. If we don't feel ourselves to be worthy of love or equal or of equal value to the person who we are pursuing and obsessed with and worshipping, we are going to create that discrepancy between us. And because we place this person on a pedestal and see them as being a god or a goddess while we are a mere disgusting worm writhing around in the dirt, to compensate for that inequality, for that disparity in our social positions, we feel we need to work harder, we need to give everything. And the mere fact of this God apparently paying even the slightest bit of attention to a mere mortal can make us hang on to that thing and make it so much more than it is. If we are feeling good about ourselves, if we have a healthy self-esteem, if we feel we are worthy for love, then we understand that there has to be that Libra balance, that whatever we are giving, we deserve to receive. However, if we have a poor opinion of ourselves, we can give, and chase, and the slightest bit of crumb of attention will be something that we are happy to turn into a banquet. So when I developed this obsession with this person, that was very much the headspace that I was in, just to give you some background, which of course you were all very hungry for. But without going into the nitty details of all the ups and downs along the way, it was clear that this was a mostly very one-sided thing. There was some kind of connection there long enough for the person to keep me dangling on, but it was very clear that I wanted it much more zealously than the other person did. And because of that, I felt like I was constantly hanging around waiting to be messaged back, that I was waiting weeks or months at a time for them just to spare the time to actually see me in person. And it was just that constant undernourished thing of, when am I going to eat again? When am I going to hear from this person again? When are they actually going to be affectionate and nice to me again? You have placed all of your ideas of romantic survival on that one person, and they're just there waiting, starving, wondering when the next morsel is going to come along. And this had gone on for about half a year of just things getting progressively worse between us. And the Mars-Pluto opposition actually ended up being a time of breakthrough, where I finally accepted the state of affairs. And, I addressed the inequalities. I brought up the fact that I felt like I was waiting around all the time, or that I wasn't being given adequate attention, or this, that, or the other. And, to her credit, the person I was obsessed with admitted that I wanted more than they were willing or interested in giving, and so they cut it off. And it was only when I had the courage to face that it was this situation that had just been left dangling and unresolved for a long time, that cord was finally able to be cut. And it is often during oppositions that we make the decision to cut cords that we may have been wrestling with for a long time. And after the tension of that being unresolved and of not really knowing where I stood for a long time, for it to end was very liberating. And I realised that I'd gotten into that situation because I'd allowed myself to be controlled by my deep feelings and by the fact that I had a poor image of myself. I'd lost my confidence sexually, I'd lost my confidence in my external appearance. So when it ended, I started taking much better care of those things. I was determined to improve myself, to better myself in my own eyes and in the eyes of other people, so that I would feel worthy of love again. So it ended up being something that was very productive and which helped me to grow as a person. So you can see from that example how Mars opposite Pluto can empower us to face our fears and finally confront things which we have buried and pressed down for too long, things that have taken control of us because we have permitted them to. This opposition occurs every 2 years, and during the previous cycle it happened in 2017, and it was a similar story of imprisonment leading to breakthrough then. So earlier in that year, in 2017, due to various excesses in my lifestyle, I ended up having a nervous breakdown. I was in a very bad place. I was having constant panic attacks, and my life just felt like it was completely controlled by fear, that my body was no longer my own because these panic attacks could seize me at any time. And I don't know if you've ever had a panic attack, but these ones were very extreme. They were so extreme sometimes that they could leave me physically paralyzed and unable to control my body. And because that was such a terrifying experience and it would make me feel like I was dying, most of my life just revolved around desperately wanting to find a way to stop these panic attacks occurring, because it was preventing me from living my life. I could barely go 10 minutes down the road from my house without the panic attack taking over and finding that I needed to run back just to try and contain the situation. And when the Mars-Pluto opposition came around, it ended up being a moment where I finally got my power back. I realised that with panic attacks, they are caused by your body being in constant flight or flight mode, by your body being swamped by hormones, catecholamines and adrenaline just pulsing through you all the time, saying there is danger, so you need to run. And the best way to get rid of adrenaline is through exercise. And once I realised that exercise and constant activity was going to be the only way I could soak up the excess adrenaline and catecholamines and stress hormones going from my body, I finally found the key. And that didn't mean things changed overnight, but it meant I could find something that could progressively give me control over myself after a long time of feeling like I was being controlled by my body and by mysterious dark forces that I didn't understand. And instead of being this horrible, terrified shut-in who could barely leave the house for more than a few minutes, it felt like I gradually got the world back, that all those things that had been cut off from me were now being opened up to me again, because I knew how to manage and work on what I was going through. Now, because we can also be more likely to project planets onto other people or external situations during Mars-Pluto oppositions, very often we can find that a plutonic experience, a death or a destruction or big turbulent upheaval in someone else's life ends up having a knock-on effect on ours. So to give some other examples from my own life, quite a few times during this aspect, I used to be a carer, a private carer looking after elderly people in their own homes. And during at least 2 or 3 of these transits, the elderly people that I was looking after during this time either died or reached such a debilitating condition that they had to go into a nursing home. And so it ended up being this knock-on effect where someone else dying had an effect on me, because it meant that the work that I was doing for them ended, or if I was there whilst they were in the process of dying or falling apart or going through a big health crisis, that would obviously have a knock-on effect on being a very stressful, frustrating and anger-inducing situation for me. When this aspect last occurred back in over May and June last year, my mother found out that she was unable to renew her mortgage on her house and was going to have to put it back on the market. And obviously that affects me because she's my mother, and suddenly she had to move from the only ever house I'd ever known her in, but also many of my possessions, in fact almost everything I owned, was still there. And I knew that if the house went, I was also going to have to get rid of all those possessions because they had nowhere else to go. So that was another example of how a destruction or a big transformation and change in someone else's life had a knock-on effect on me. Now, I focus mostly on the separative nature of this opposition, but oppositions aren't just aspects of repulsion. They can also be aspects of attraction, where the planet on the other side of the duality represents something that is both attracting and terrifying to us because it seems to be the opposite of who we are. It's the case of opposites attracting, particularly if we are identifying with Mars, and we are more likely to project the Pluto on someone else, and we might find that someone comes into our life who has a very strong power over us, whether that's emotional or sexual or romantic or anything along the lines. So again, back in 2023, during this last opposition, a friend of mine had it, Mars and Pluto in opposition between the first and seventh houses, and quite unexpectedly she began a torrid, very sexually powerfully charged love affair with a man she met in a dating app. And every time she was describing the meetings with this person, it was cinematic, it was vivid, it was life exalting, it was more intense than anything she'd experienced in her whole life. And yet it was also clear that this guy was holding back a lot from her and was the one who had the power in this situation. So new dynamics can emerge during this opposition as well as ending. Anyway, very interesting, all the stories I dug up connected to this aspect, and I could spend another hour or two enumerating them all, but I think that would just be ad nauseum. So I'm going to wrap that up here. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave your comments and remarks under it. If you have any experience of this aspect, I would love to know. I only really spoke about it in transit, so if any of you have this aspect natally, I would love to know how it's played out in your own life and the different situations and scenarios in which it has manifested itself. And if any of you want me to do any personal astrology for you, you can contact me at Thestarsunravelled@outlook.com. I will put the information in the bio below. I would also like to say that since I was last making videos more actively last year, I also released a big epic prog rock album called The Dream of Odysseus, released under the name of Penelope and Ulysses. So if any of you like big, strange prog rock albums, I will leave the link to that in the bio as well.